Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hello, I'm Chris Stirewalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. And Eliana Johnson, I got to tell you, I'm on one. I'm on one yet again. And I finally figured out the linguistic abuse that offends me most, or the common linguistic abuse that offends me most. And I was at the airport this week, and I observed a young man, we'll call it 30, right, with his wife. And he was wearing athletic shoes and whatever, fleece and whatever, which I totally accept as they're going on vacation. He's not traveling for work. Fine. I live in the world as it is. But he was sitting there looking at his phone, and his wife, who was carrying at least half of their capacious amount of luggage, asked him what he wanted for breakfast as they sat by the gate. Now, I have qualms about sending your wife or significant other, a man sending his wife or significant other, to bring him breakfast like a child.
Why?
Because he's the one who should be getting her breakfast, not she getting him breakfast.
Oh, I would totally go grab breakfast at the airport.
Well, but I make allowances for it, because if she was going to go to the lavatory, or she was going, if she had something else to do and was going to pick it up, fine. That's fine. So I've overcome these obstacles in the cauldron of resentments that I carry around with me every day and do daily battle to defeat. And then, do you know what he said to her? He said, can I get a sausage, egg, and cheese, blah, 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 blah. And I realized I hate it when people say that to paid servers, but to say it to your spouse, the love of your life, can I get? And I wanted to stand up and say, did you mean, may I please have? And it is, I realized in that moment, it is my longest running obsession. And the reason that I am obsessed with people who say, can I get instead of may I please have, is that it is disrespectful. It is patently unkind to the person you're talking to, especially a loved one. And my white hot rage has yet to subside.
Okay. Are you offended when somebody says that to an employee of an establishment? Yes,
it's bad grammar, right? Because
okay.
I don't know. The correct response is, I don't know. Can you? This is not, we don't live in a police state. This is not a permission question. It lacks the word please, and it has a distracted, absent, whatever. I don't know. Can I get blah, 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 blah. Grammatically bad and not courteous.
Okay.
So thank you for letting me vent my splenetic
my rage
energy.
For other. Okay. This does not rankle me.
Well, I'm just telling all of the dudes out there, may I please? May I please? May I please? May
Hey,
I?
Patrick,
if it pleases you.
I know you're not listening, but if you are, I'll get you breakfast. I got you.
I know Jessica would do the same for me, and it's fine. Getting breakfast is fine. That's not wrong. But it set me up to think that this young man was not being his best self.
All right, Chris. Speaking of not being one's best self.
Oh, yes.
You know, we were talking about what order we should do things in this podcast. And I said our front page has to begin with the two gargantuan pieces on the family Murdoch. One in the New York Times Magazine and one in The Atlantic about the family's battle over the terms of the Murdoch Trust, which will determine essentially who controls the battle really seems to be over Fox News, but it would be who controls all these entities: the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, the
Fox
Australian
Sports.
news, Fox Sports, the Australian newspapers that Murdoch owns. But the controversy inside the family is over the editorial tack of Fox News. And the Atlantic piece is from the perspective of, mostly told from the perspective of James Murdoch, who's considered the wayward son. He's the most liberal of the four Murdoch children who are party to this trust.
I think
the daughter-in-law.
The daughter, yeah.
Well, yeah. So his wife, Catherine, is quite liberal. And then the New York Times Magazine piece, the reporters actually got copies of all of these documents that were filed in is a probate court the right term? In this probate court in Reno, Nevada, where Murdoch filed a lawsuit to change the terms of the trust in order to grant his eldest son, Lachlan, control of the companies. And he lost that suit, and he's now appealing it. But the documents themselves contain all these text messages between the family members, and are quite revealing. Now, I have to say, I read both these pieces from beginning to end. I did not realize, and perhaps this is stupid, I actually didn't realize how closely that the show Succession was modeled on what's actually happening in the Murdoch family. I just didn't think the dynamics were all that well known. And to the point that in one of these pieces, I can't remember which one now, it talks about how some members of the family can't watch it because it hits too close to home for them. And others talk about, who's leaking to the showrunners. So that was really interesting. But also, what you come away with is that this is a hugely consequential legal battle in terms of who ends up, how the terms of this trust end up shaking out. It is a hugely consequential legal battle for the future of the American news media landscape.
Well, certainly. So there's News Corp as a media entity, which they already cashed in their biggest proven reserve when they did their deal with Disney, right? It was this huge deal, and they took all of the proceeds, all the profit from that, and that was massive. The growth side of their business is sports, right? And sports betting and all of that stuff. Fox Sports is the comer, and they have done very well pushing into Latin American markets and trying to own soccer, and they have leaned in on that. But the emotional heart of the enterprise is the newspapers and then Fox News. And I'm not saying anything that isn't common public knowledge. I think these pieces both lay it out, that the argument, and there was a back and forth, I forget in which of the pieces, where they were talking about how the Murdochs responded to the uproar over the 2020 election, and basically with the Murdochs lawyer saying the plan, we executed the plan, and the plan was to suck up to our viewers more and tell them what they wanted to hear more. And I guess I would say on the first part, you want to say it's Rupert Murdoch's company. It's his money. He can give it to whatever child he wants, right? He made a decision. Lachlan made a decision. He became the guy. James oversaw a merger that made the family much, much richer, or a buyout that made the family much, much richer. And then he was dumped. And Lachlan said, I'm going to be like you, Dad. I'm going to do this like you do it. And his father is rewarding him for that. And it's their stuff, right? But then you get into the legal complication, which is, in order to secure adequate control of the enterprise, Murdoch was forced by shareholders, essentially, to come up with a succession plan, to say, this is what it's going to be. Here's how we're going to do it. And that trust and all of that was a response to pressure to get the leverage and resources that they needed to do the things that they wanted to do.
I believe
And
it was also part of his divorce from his second wife, who was very keen to see all four
right.
children be treated equally, but who now appears to side with him in believing that Lachlan is the rightful heir to the throne. But at the time they were divorced, which I think was the 90s, was insistent that he divided up and hand them equal amounts of control.
And made more complicated by the fact that all of these children and their grandchildren are going to be very rich.
Well, they already are.
They're all they're all going to be they're already rich, and when Rupert Murdoch dies, and whatever happens out of this, they're all going to be even richer. And this is about, I guess here's the way I would say. Right now, Fox News is at the height of its power. It's never been more powerful. We would not have thought that would be the case if we were recording this in 2020 or 2021. We would have said, no, not the case. But here they are at the height of their power. The Jesse Waters was talking about how, future president will be a Fox News host, and they're really in their glory right now. What I wonder, though, is how long that goes on and how much longer that's true. The competition for being Fox battled its way back to be the 50,000 watt blowtorch dominating the Republican Party and conservative media. But I don't know. In the long run, I don't know. And I found it all quite interesting, quite fascinating.
I highly recommend both pieces, although the upshot of both is we have no idea who's going to control this empire in the end, and that these people don't like each other very much.
It's some wild business. It's literally some wild business.
But I would say, especially the Times Magazine piece, which relies on the documents in this legal case, it absolutely fascinating.
Truly.
Chris, let's also talk about we're recording on Friday this week. So yesterday, on Thursday, Hamas released or handed over to the International Red Cross and then back to Israel 4 bodies, which were supposed to be of Shiri Bibas and her 2 children, Ariel and Kafir, and a 4th of Oded Lifshitz, a man in his 80s. Israel has since said that one of the bodies is actually not of Shiri Bibas. But we should talk a little bit about these propaganda ceremonies that Hamas is conducting as it hands over the bodies, in which the participation of Gazan civilians celebrating the handover against a backdrop of a portrait of sorts of a monstrous image of Bibi Netanyahu is there. They're playing celebratory music and dancing, and it was particularly grisly yesterday when there were coffins of children on the stage. And we want to talk about that generally, but then NPR described the scene as somber, which it emphatically wasn't. But to talk about the role of all of this propaganda in Hamas's strategy, because all of this stuff is broadcast on video for them. So certainly one of the worst days of the war since it started.
Well, the fascistic, the suicide cult, the energy around all of it, they're trying, I'm sure, to save face with their own people, that they're doing this, that doesn't make them weak and it doesn't make them whatever. But for the Western news media, any prior assertion about Hamas being a rational actor, it's been disproven again and again and again and again by the very taking of the hostages. But this as the punctuation at the end of this hostage ordeal should cement in the minds of every journalist, Western, Middle Eastern, anywhere, of what Hamas is. Truly appalling, truly shocking. And this is not an entity that you have negotiations with and that you talk to about the deal that you'll cut for humanitarian aid. This is an unconditional surrender situation. You cannot deal. I cannot imagine a way that you can deal with people who are part of a death cult.
I think the most upsetting thing about this was to see children being brought to this and raised to celebrate the murder of other children, which speaks to the sickness of the culture there. And remember that the Beebuses were abducted by civilians, and Israel has since said that the two children were, Hamas had said that they were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israel now saying that they've examined the bodies and that they were beaten to death. This 4-year-old and 9-month-old baby. And I do think that this will make it more difficult for Israel to enter into any kind of second phase negotiation. But for anybody who still harbored illusions of a two-state solution, I think this is going to make it insurmountable. You can't live next to people who celebrate the murder of your babies.
Yeah, this is truly appalling, truly barbaric.
And for the Western media to call it a somber scene is abdication of responsibility.
Gross.
Okay. Biggest Trump news of the week is obviously his pivot on Ukraine. It seemed to me that during the campaign, he was keeping his options open, but he's clearly taken a attack now that he wants to end the war, which he did on the campaign trail, but now that he wants to end the war by indicating that it was Ukraine's fault. Ukraine should have embraced surrender earlier, and let's get to it. And that's a change.
I don't know. I don't know what the Jewish version of a patron saint is, but whatever that is, John Podhoretz is, I think, that of this podcast now, after our pod heavy last week. And then he wrote at his magazine Commentary, "It is not for Trump to decide whether Ukraine continues to defend its territory and its sovereignty. He is, of course, within his mandate as president to cut off aid and thereby make the war sputter out in order to make the Ukrainians suffer for their disobedience in refusing to walk quietly to the gallows while thanking him as they are hanged in the worldwide public square. Trump is under no obligation to support Ukraine. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But doing so while accusing Ukraine of being the aggressor in the most unjustified, pitiless, and brutal war of aggression in our time is an act of infamy almost without parallel." And well said. It was interesting to see. I certainly take your point that during the campaign, Trump mealy-mouthed the question of Ukraine. He walked back prior antipathy toward Ukraine because he knew that for some subset of Republican voters, this was a huge issue. So he adopted he adopted a Nikki Haley primary voter approach, sort of
even that, just strategic ambiguity.
Well, but I mean an approach to make it possible for those voters to reduce those voters' moral qualms about voting for Trump, because he wasn't talking all the time about how terrible Ukraine was.
I don't even think he needs to be super like, oh, we got to keep the money flowing and the arms flowing. Like, let's just not say that it's their fault and they started it and Putin's a great guy.
I talk to, when you talk to Republicans and Republican lawmakers and former lawmakers about this, they're hopeful that they can do with Trump what they did last time, which is he let him fulminate, let him suck up to Putin, let him do all that stuff. And Mike Waltz did a press conference. And if you want to know, like, what's the point of view, that's the point of view. You ignore the things that are said, and what do they always say? We're focusing on the policies, not the rhetoric. where Marco Rubio and Waltz are in a different position than the people in the first Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, when Donald Trump would do something bizarre vis-a-vis Russia, right? When there was the Helsinki meeting with Putin or whatever, political pressure could be brought to bear on Trump, in which they would say, look, you got this Russiagate, you're in the Democrats are going after you on this. This looks bad. So we can't do that right now. We got to think about reelection. Now Trump feels vindicated and feels like he can, and he is also beyond the reach of voters. And the open question is basically, does Trump believe that he is in the process of forging a new world order in which the United States and Russia are aligned or not? The history, if first administration suggests that he wanted something like that but couldn't have it, and in the end, the Western Alliance, NATO at its core, persisted and was strengthened in the end because they started spending more, and then Putin invades and they start spending even more. They add new members. They do all of this stuff. But now the question is very much open again. And I cannot imagine anybody, there's no point in Russian history. Maybe you could go to Peter the Great, but not even then. Maybe Peter and Catherine, you could go all the way back and say, okay, these were fairly reliable partners, willing to work with the West in a predictable way. But the story of Russian history is the story of Russia is for Russia and not for anybody else, and not a reliable partner to anybody else. And we'll put it this way, it's a mighty bold move, Cotton. It's a mighty bold move. And we'll find out probably in the next 6 weeks, whether he means to do it. And there is nothing that Congress can do to stop him.
One other thing I wanted to point out is Trump put out a truth in which he attacked Zelensky and called him a dictator and said how terrible he is. And the language in that tweet really came directly from a podcast that Tucker Carlson did with Piers Morgan. And that was striking to me. So clearly either or Trump is listening to this, or somebody's putting the transcript in front of him. I would suspect the latter. And in that podcast, Trump in his truth said Zelensky's a dictator who wasn't elected. And in this podcast with Piers Morgan, Tucker Carlson says, I just want to know what a dictator is. I mean, maybe Zelensky's a better guy than Putin or whatever, and you can say some things about one or not the other. But if we're going to define dictator, the first feature of a dictator is that he's not elected. He's also banned a religious denomination. He's murdered his political opponents. He's banned a language group. Those all seem like features of a dictatorship to me. Now, he has the support of British intelligence agencies. That doesn't mean he's not a dictator, though. That sounds like a dictator. I mean, if I just gave you a piece of paper and I was like, here are some qualities of a European leader, you would say, well, that's not legitimate. That guy's a dictator. I can't support that.
As long as you don't acknowledge that leader's country was invaded. That's the only part of it that really tends to undercut the rest of it, is that the person was the leader of a sovereign country that was invaded by its neighbor and is being ruthlessly, that children are being stolen from their parents, women are being raped. Like, this is, talk about barbaric. We're in a real medieval mode here. And as long as you exclude that fact, you can spin the rest of it so you can elide your way to telling that story. The part of it, and Brother Jonah Goldberg wrote about this very persuasively, which is, I thought the whole point was that character didn't matter, and that we were now we were keeping it real in our politics. And the character of these people who we deal with, the world is a messy, ugly place, and we just have to always do what's best for the United States. In what universe is it best for the United States to have Russia consume through conquest one of its neighbors? I don't know. I don't know. Even if, let's say that Zelensky was as bad as Saddam Hussein. He is the opposite of Saddam Hussein, but let's say he was as bad as Saddam Hussein was. There were times in American history where we made choices and said, well, this one is worse than that one, so we're going to side with this guy, right? In the Iran-Iraq war, we said, both bad. These are both bad, but it's probably in America's strategic interest for Iraq to win, or the Mujahideen and the Soviet Union. Ferdinand Marcos, and I mean, we can go through the list of 1,000 times that the United States chose the lesser of two evils for their strategic interests. In this case, both the strategic interest and the moral question line up pretty clearly on one side. Whatever deficiencies Ukraine has, whatever deficiencies Zelensky has, and I'm sure there are plenty, pale in comparison to those of the Russians. And from a strategic standpoint, what does the United States gain if Russia swallows Ukraine? I think what we end up gaining is a Europe poised for war. I think what you end up with is that I don't think Finland is going to say, well, I guess this is how Donald Trump wants it. We got to let Putin have his way because it's too expensive. I don't think they're going to do that. And I think there's a very dangerous course that this follows after that.
Yeah, it will be quite interesting to see how this shakes out. Chris, you flagged, and it's an interesting piece that also states the obvious, how the Trumps turned an election victory into a cash bonanza. This is a Wall Street Journal piece, and it combines both the Trumps' greediness with the willingness of companies now to do business with them. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, as you say, there's no aha. There's no like, whoa, I had no idea that the Trumps were rapacious buckraking in ways that would make Hunter Biden blush. What's interesting about this is the depth of reporting. This is Rebecca Ballhaus, Dana Matalati, and Annie Linsky. And the Wall Street Journal continues to beef up its Washington coverage. And this is just an extraordinarily detailed compendium of all of the stuff. And it's useful and good and in-depth coverage, and it could have been a favorite. It's just well done.
Honestly, this next one, when I read it, this is a New York Times piece, how Trump's directives echo Project 2025. When I read it, I was like, this should be in our facile file.
I sent it as facile.
Oh, okay.
If Colin were of sterner stuff, he would have, because we have a big facile bucket this week. It would have gone facile. I had been wondering at what point, and I looked for it, and I'm reading every day. I'm consuming an astonishing amount of news, and I thought, when will someone do the story? Actually, Project 2025 is real. And it took until this week for me to, and maybe others have written it. Maybe Mother Jones was out there doing it. I don't know. But it took until this week for the New York Times to say, hey, wait a minute. I think Donald Trump may have been lying about distancing himself from Project 2025. And if you look at it, a lot of the stuff that they're doing was in Project 2025. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, can I just read the key paragraph, though?
Yep.
So, yes, the Times says, he was lying, and really, he's doing Project 2025. Here's the key paragraph. Some of the goals outlined in the Project 2025 document line up with long-standing conservative policy positions, so it's not surprising they would be reflected in the initial moves of a new Republican president. That said, not all of Mr. Trump's latest directives have an analog in Project 2025's blueprint. In some cases, they go even further than the document does, like with the administration's attempt to dismantle USAID, and in others, they oppose its guidance, as in the case of Mr. Trump's refusal to enforce the TikTok ban. So, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But, he was lying.
He was saying what he was doing there, what he did on Ukraine and what he did on abortion and on a bunch of stuff which is, oh, wait a minute, you want me to say something different? Yeah, whatever. Let's just have the election. I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, and we're going to get through. But it also speaks to the misunderstanding, the willful misunderstanding of Democrats in talking about Project 2025. They seized on it. This is our thing. This is the Frank Luntzian messaging that we're going to just club to death like a harp seal out an ice flow. We're coming. We're going to do Project 20. You remember at their convention, they had the big book of Project 2025.
Oh,
and
yeah.
did all of that stuff. So I don't know what percentage, 70% of Project 2025 is stuff that is just Republican stuff, right? It's just Republican stuff. And the Democrats made a boogeyman out of it. And then Trump did what they couldn't imagine him doing, but obviously he would do. I've never seen the Heritage Foundation. I don't know what the Heritage Foundation is. And of course, in Trump's case, he doesn't worry about offending them because he knows that they know, right? And on the day of his inauguration, they covered their entire building with a huge poster, a 30-foot tall graven image of Trump as Baal, honoring him and all that stuff. So Democrats got played here in a pretty astonishing way.
Well, real shocker that this is the Dem message, and now we're seeing it printed in the Times. What else is new?
Mm-hmm.
What else is new? Okay, Chris, this brings us to our business news, and we have Washington Post backs out of fire Elon Musk ad order. The group that wanted to place this ad said it signed a $115,000 agreement with the Post to run the ad that would have covered the front and back page of the Tuesday paper, as well as a full-page ad with the same theme inside the paper. It said it planned to purchase the ad in collaboration with the Southern Poverty Law Center Action Fund. But a Post advertising sales representative was informed of the nature of the ad and seemed confident that running it over the paper wouldn't be a problem, but it was.
But Southern Poverty Law Center is a preposterous institution and has yet to be fully and adequately discredited for what it is, which is much like the ACLU was turned into a cash hustle and all of that stuff. Southern Poverty Law Center, whatever its origins were, and those can be debated about the virtue of their initial cause, is, I'll put it this way. It's not helping Democrats. It's definitely not helping Democrats by broad brush painting things that are not white supremacist groups as white supremacy. It's not helping people who are trying to reasonably discern at a time when Steve Bannon is doing a Nazi salute at CPAC. Southern Poverty Law Center is no good resource for determining what is actual white supremacy and what is not. So there's that. But there's also this. If I was Jeff Bezos, so the framing of the story and the framing of the narrative across the media in reporting on this was the ad criticized Elon Musk. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to criticize Elon Musk, so he did not let them do this. I see it in a slightly different way. If I'm Jeff Bezos and I'm losing money on the Washington Post, I sure as shooting do not want to lose money on the Washington Post and still take $115,000 from people who are trying to scrounge up donors to make my newspaper look ugly and preposterous. Rap ads are terrible. I hate rap ads. They're bad even when they're not for dubious groups. And if I'm Jeff Bezos, it's not worth $115,000 to me. In the time that we've been talking about this, Jeff Bezos has made a lot more than $115,000. And it would not be worth it to me to have my beautiful paper that is carefully laid out with its nice fonts and all of these things wrapped up in a piece of basically print matter clickbait. Harumph.
Chris, that brings us to our second piece of business news for the week, which is NBC Universal settling a defamation lawsuit that we at the Beacon have covered closely. And this was a defamation lawsuit filed by a gynecologist an obstetrician who worked in ICE detention facilities. And MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff dubbed him the uterus collector, alleging that he performed hysterectomies that were unnecessary or botched them at an ICE facility. This is performed on illegal immigrants, and that got them sued for defamation. So we've been covering the twists and turns of this trial, which was really not covered at all in the mainstream media. And today, the parties have filed notice that they reached a settlement. We do not yet know, and we may not know for how much. So the joint notice of settlement to the court as of this morning says the parties are diligently working to finalize the language of a settlement agreement, and they are expected to effectuate the settlement within the next several weeks. And this is related to the immigration policies in Trump's first term.
I didn't even know it was a thing.
Well, it does involve prominent personalities at NBC and MSNBC. So like the CNN lawsuit where they settled with that Navy veteran about his efforts to evacuate Afghan refugees, where they reached a settlement. This one has also flown under the radar.
Didn't even know it.
Okay, Chris, that brings us to our facile files.
I'll tell you, we've had some weeks recently where the facile files were thin, were non-existent, but we are making it up this week. This is a robust, deep, and weighty facile file. So good.
Let's start with Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass sitting down for a local media interview saying she's going to get to the bottom of how she ended up in Ghana during the Los Angeles fires. She's going to find the culprit, find the real killer here. Let's play the clip.
The country.
But what do you mean there were warnings you weren't aware of? Because I know we were talking about it on the news. A lot of people were talking about the problems, warning that this was going to be a huge deal.
So when I talked about it with the fire chief, what she said is that we have warnings of Santa Ana winds a lot, but predicting this, and you saw, from the city, from the county, that level of preparation really didn't happen. So it didn't reach that level to me to say something terrible could happen and maybe you shouldn't have gone on the trip.
Why didn't it
But to
happen?
me, I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the things we need to look at. So
Just amazing. I have to say, the idea of we're going to find out how I did something politically damaging and stupid is just, this is a person who spent too long in Congress in a safe seat and was not accustomed to the vicissitudes of executive leadership. Wow.
And could have been vice president on the short list.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And if you're a Democrat and you think Kamala Harris couldn't have been worse, there you have it. There you have it.
All right. Up next, we have. All right. This is a reader letter to the New York Times.
Well, this is the ethicist. This is their.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought these are the people who read the New York Times. A reader writing to the ethicist, as a white man, can I date women of color to advance my anti-racism? And this person writes, part of the reason that I prioritize it is to combat implicit bias. Having grown up in a fairly white, quasi-rural place, I'm dedicated to educating myself on issues of racism, sexism, and other forms of curiarchy, while also learning from marginalized people. For me, principles lead the way to attractions. I start by eating a food or adopting a habit because it's good for me, and after trying it enough times, I find I really like it for what it is. The same applies to people I'm considering dating.
Way to go. And what lucky gals are out there that he's learning to like them. He's, as a matter of cultural exploration, is out there learning to accept them in their differences. Lucky for you, ladies.
A curiarchy is a social system or set of connecting social systems built around domination, oppression, and submission.
Wow. This guy is, ladies, hurry up before he makes a decision about whether it is more helpful to the oppressed to date. I guess I would say this. I believe I do have the ethical solution for this man, which is if he wants to help people, he should not date anyone. He should just date no one, because this kind of paternalistic attitude toward women of any race, ethnicity, whatever, would indicate that he should perhaps find whatever religion is closest to him, find a monastery of some kind and go there and think about his sins.
Yeah, maybe don't use the people you date to
Just
some
wild.
other end.
Just wild.
Okay, we have National Public Radio. As Trump takes over leadership at Kennedy Center, some protest through dance. That'll do it, 34 dancers performed the Nelkin line, a piece by choreographer Pina Bausch that pays homage to the seasons. In the piece, dancers walk in a single file line and make synchronized movements. It felt symbolic that we're moving in unison, says dancer and educator Kelly King, who organized the protest. And there's something just compelling to see a straight line of movers dancing this way in a march.
Well, first of all, the clause at the end of a headline, some protest through dance, is, there's no, try your best, New York Times. I don't think you're going to beat this year some protest through dance as a dependent clause. But can I say something? I kind of love these people, right? They're dancers. They're not, they're serious about their dance, but they're not, they're creative types. And I kind of, something about this is darling. I don't think they want to be seen as darling, but I find their naivete and love of dance to be kind of darling.
And finally, Chris, we have from CBS, online searches for gambling addiction surge as sports betting expands, study finds.
Well, let's start with my priors on this. I have talked on this podcast and on many other platforms about the consequences of what happens when institutions embrace gambling, online gambling, and treat it like it's no big deal. And the wreckage that the move toward phone-based gambling is strewing through our society, and how I don't think that the PGA and Major League Baseball and whoever else should be like, bet, hey, have you thought about gambling on this? Bet. And the rule that I have is, if you wouldn't say it about liquor, right, don't say it about this. Treat it like what it is, which is a vice that some people are destroyed by. So have some perspective and some humility about it. But of course, they do not. Now, that having been said, I have a thing about people using online searches as a metric for sentiment. Here's the lead. Online searches for gambling addiction related terms have surged in recent years across the U.S., especially in states that have legalized online sports betting, according to a study published on Monday in the American Medical Association's peer-reviewed journal. Oh, well, it's peer-reviewed. In that case, it must be useful. There were 23% more searches nationwide, and they didn't do unanchored statistics, so I credit you here, 6.5 to 7.3 million queries related to seeking help for gambling addiction, the study found. The researchers analyzed blah, 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 blah. Increases in Illinois, 35%, Massachusetts, da-da-da-da-da-da. Hey, guys, first of all, no duh. Second of all, what about all the searches that are people who are fighting it? What about all the searches that are this? This would be like saying in 2019, there were very few searches for novel coronavirus. In 2020, there were a lot more. Therefore, what? This is the most facile kind of data abuse. It doesn't tell us anything. And it's just, this is just for me, a pet peeve. It's up there with, I guess I would say, can I get a statistically literate approach to this that doesn't just take meaningless numbers and try to add a hard scientific vibe to something that is fundamentally a moral question? Jeez Louise.
Also, should we at all be surprised that when something expands, more
right,
people become addicted to it?
Well, I mean, I don't think kale addiction is a problem. Things can be
when something addictive.
right. Yes, exactly. Whether it's online pornography, online gambling, online whatever. Yeah, I'm sure it's true. My complaint here is the way that they dress up things looking for data that proves something. I don't think this proves anything that people do not know. And it is wrapped in the guise of, it's the American Medical Association. Like, come on, give me a break.
Okay, Chris, that brings us to our style section, where we have another Times. I mean, this is perfect, like representative of the readers of the Times. What should I wear to protest an unspoken dress code? A reader asks how to push back against the resurgence of traditional dressing. Okay. The question is,
I have not noticed this resurgence.
Yeah, I know. With the new Trump administration, there seems to be a general trend toward old-fashioned gender stereotypes in dress, which seems to me like a frustratingly restrictive version of how a woman looks. Is there a way to use clothes to rebel against this unspoken dress code, even in a fairly conservative work environment? I just love this because it's not a dress code. It's just what this person observes people doing. So you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. And by the way, stop making everything political. Don't make it political whether you can date a lady depending on her ethnicity, and wear what you want to wear, fit into your thing. I mean, how do I fight back against? Come on.
Yeah, wear what you want, lady.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And I wanted to call attention to a series of events at CBS News, which continues to be roiled in crisis. Did I say that right?
Embroiled in crisis, I think.
Roiled.
Oh, roiled by crisis.
Roiled by, yeah, I didn't think I did. Roiled by crisis. And the latest incident, and we should play the clip, was Margaret Brennan's contention in an interview with Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the Holocaust was an outgrowth of the Third Reich's unrestricted speech. Too much free speech in the Third Reich led to the Holocaust. And it was funny, I just so happened to be reading a history of Nazi Germany that when this aired, that talked about Hitler coming to power and cracking down on Jewish artists. And as this aired, and this was in 1933, when Jewish artists began to be discriminated against, many fled Germany. So, not exactly, and things got more and more and more restricted from there. Goebbels, not exactly known for his love of free speech. And anybody who has read the wonderful William Shirer books he has a contemporaneous diary about being an American broadcasting from Nazi Germany and having to get his broadcasts through the censors there to broadcast back to the US would know what a stupid claim this was. And since then, there's been no retraction or apology from CBS News. Rubio shot her down, but let's play that clip.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
All right. So this is the latest in a line. It's sort of strange that there's been nothing from CBS said in the wake of this glaring factual misstatement from a major Sunday show anchor, but it came in the wake of their executives cracking down on morning show anchor Tony Dockapel, who did a tough interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates over his book on Israel Palestine, and he was reprimanded in front of the staff for being insufficiently hospitable on the air to Coates, and also internal guidance on how to refer to Israel, Palestine, Gaza, Hamas. Those things were reported by the Free Press. And so we learned later this week that the CBS News executive who reprimanded Dockapel over that interview, Adrienne Rourke, is leaving the network. She appears to have been pushed out. And the remaining question is whether Wendy McMahon, who runs CBS News, will also follow her out the door. That looks like just a matter of time. But they clearly have editorial problems at CBS News. Oh, I should also mention the 60 Minutes segment that was done, a laudatory segment on 60 Minutes about Europe's policing of speech.
Yep.
That was overseen. The head guy at 60 Minutes is a guy by the name of Bill Owens, who has also overseen the restructuring and rejiggering of the evening news, which has a rotating cast of anchors. Norah O'Donnell is out, and the ratings have absolutely plummeted. And they have real problems. There's nobody in charge of it. Adrienne Rourke and Wendy McMahon both came from local news and don't seem to have either the editorial chops or the management skills to really run a major broadcast news organization. And the Brennan brouhaha, which has not been addressed or resolved publicly, was the latest in a string of these crises.
What's amazing to me here is J.D. Vance. So this is about J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance chastising Europe and Germany for having free speech restrictions. And neither J.D. Vance nor Margaret Brennan and CBS seem to grasp the essential fact of why Germany has the rules. Right? Germany has the rules because Germans live in the shadow of the atrocities committed 2 generations ago. That's where Germany lives. The Holocaust, which Germans couldn't acknowledge until the 70s, really, in a complete kind of way. They have these rules because they don't want free speech. I think free speech is good, but I don't think every country, as J.D. Vance would say, we've got to be realistic about the people we're dealing with and who we're dealing with. Germany has speech codes because of the Holocaust. And that's something J.D. Vance has to acknowledge. And it's also something that Margaret Brennan has to acknowledge. And neither sufficiently seem to be able to do so. The idea that free speech was the problem that created the Holocaust, though, is a preposterous leap, is a ridiculous leap forward that was the problem. The problem was that whoever the Margaret Brennans were of the Weimar Republic, whoever the mediating institutions were, I assume, whatever the version of selling online gambling to young men, they were doing that instead of doing their jobs. The collapse of the Weimar Republic, and if we go back to 1924 and we look at what transpired after that, the rise of the Nazis was because the people in the places that were supposed to be good custodians of the public trust were bad custodians of the public trust and were too often self-interested and engaged in short-term thinking and not acting with patriotic grace and patriotic dignity. This was a real, nobody looks good in this one. And the fact that CBS, which is an American institution rooted in the idea of free expression, is against free expression is astonishing.
And Rubio acquitted himself quite well.
Yeah, for sure.
But how a Sunday morning anchor can be so ignorant is astonishing.
All right. My obsession is one I've had before, but this is Wall Street Journal piece, Inside Amazon's Messy Push to Bring Everyone Back to the Office. I've gone back and forth on the question of being back in the office. And I know that there's a video of Jamie Dimon that's making the rounds right now.
Oh my gosh, that was epic.
Jamie Dimon in a profane rant about why people at Goldman have to be back in the office.
It was epic.
And people really like it and all of, and I get it. And maybe that's true for Goldman, but I don't think it's
JP Morgan.
Or JP Morgan, I'm sorry. I don't think that's true for everybody, right? I don't think it's true for everybody. And this is a story the Journal does about Amazon. Jeff Bezos had a Jamie Dimon like, everybody's going back. We're all going back. And now they're trying to go back, and it's very hard to go back. And the federal government's doing a similar thing. I would just say every situation is different. Every job is different, and everything is different. And may we proceed not like we were a New York Times reader writing The Ethicist. We should not lump and class. It is good for all people to go in. It is good for all people to stay out. Perhaps we could treat every situation as different and every human being as different, and that different things work in different places at different times, and let the riot of voluntary association and free enterprise work its magic.
Well, the Amazon piece that you flagged was amusing because they called everyone back to the office and then they didn't have enough space for them.
Yeah. Oops.
All right, Chris, that brings us to reader mail, where Julie Fleming of Toronto writes, "Hi, Chris and Eliana. In case you missed this piece, unlikely, as I know Chris appreciates articles about bad shoes, shirts, suits, it may fit into your style section. This is a New York Times piece.
Oh!
Man-child learns to dress like a man."
Hey! Oh, my
Okay.
gosh. So this is amazing. I had missed this. Have you watched the lovely Jessica brought me to this show, which is, I think, a Netflix show. Ted Danson plays a guy, a retiree, who is swept into an intrigue where he infiltrates a senior living facility. And what was the first thing I said when I saw the first episode? She said, "I don't know whether you're going to like this." What was the first thing I said when I saw it? He dresses really well.
Really?
Yeah. Some of the sartorial choices are a little edgier than I would use, but real good. Real good.
I have not seen it.
Well, as a show, it's a pleasant distraction, but his wardrobe in the show, let me just say, is, especially, he plays an architect and a guy in California. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Oh, and so this is an article about a guy who gives up his children's clothes and learns to do it. Looking like an adult, I was starting to fear might mean becoming an adult. Still, I had spent decades working on this, assembling a wine cellar, reading all the Robert Caro books, amassing a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and an SEP IRA. So this is cute and funny, and I'm going to read the whole thing. And great outfit. He ends up with a burgundy tie, gray flannels, a tweed jacket. I have basically all of these. I have all of these things. This is well done. Well said.
All right, Chris, that brings us to our favorite items of the week, where you say something nice and I follow.
It's been a while since I have stand for Jeff Mauer's I Might Be Wrong Substack, but it's time. This has made me laugh out loud. It was very good. His piece on Ukraine and the Democrats' current predicament. It's profane. It's hilarious. It's great. 10 out of 10.
Mine was a wonderful New York Times profile about an art advisor and art dealer named Lisa Schiff, who stole from her clients. And she was very wealthy and is now living in her parents' apartment. The headline is "Art Advisor, Friend, Thief." Lisa Schiff became the country's leading art consultant and drew her clients close. Then she stole millions from them. Now facing up to 20 years in prison, is she ready to repent? And it is a long profile of this woman who sits down with the Times and talks about it. And it is just really well done and fascinating. I loved it and I highly recommend it, and we will link it. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.